there have been ET visitation, there have been crashed craft, there have been material and bodies recovered, and there is some group of people somewhere that may or may not be associated with government at this point, but certainly were at one time, that have this knowledge and have been attempting to conceal this knowledge or not permit it to be widely disseminated.
Well, these objects kept coming over flying the same kind of formation that we fly in our fighters.
Where were you flying?
We were flying in Germany, and we were flying F-86s. And they would come over and do the same maneuvers that we make, except every once in a while one of them would go zip. And you just can't do that in a fighter, a conventional fighter. Well, yeah, they weren't just random. They were flying fighter formations, very definitely under positive control. They're just typical saucer shape, double lenticular shape, metallic looking. I think they were definitely piloted vehicles, each one with the pilot in it, and very definitely in communication with one another, because they would have flights of more than 4. They'd have flights of maybe 12 or 16, and when they make a turn, they'd cross the flights in under, and they had to be in communication. At this time, I was involved in the research and development and doing very classified programs myself, at the test center. So I knew that we didn't have any vehicles of that kind, and I was 99 and 9/10% sure that the Russians didn't have any of that type either. So there certainly was, at that point in time, there was no doubt in my mind that this vehicle was made at some other place than here on Earth. In my opinion, I think they were worried that it would panic the public if they knew that someone had vehicles that had this kind of performance way back right after World War II, period of time. So they started telling lies about it. And then I think they had to cover another lie, tell another lie to cover their first lie, and now they don't know how to get out of it. Now it's going to be so embarrassing to admit that all these administrations have told a lot of untruths that it's going to be embarrassing to get out of it.
As I closed on this thing, well, it looked like a weather balloon, and that's what I presumed it was. And I had plenty of gas and time, so I decided I'd just come back around and make a pass on it. And I got around where I should have been coming back on this thing. All of a sudden, it didn't look like a balloon anymore. It looked like a saucer sitting on edge, about a 45-degree angle. I didn't have any gun camera film on board, unfortunately, or I'd have shot some pictures of it. And about that time, I guess whatever it was, for whatever reason, just took off climbing at about a 45-degree angle and just accelerated and disappeared. And I obviously couldn't follow it with an old piston engine fighter. So I turned around and went home.
Since my name has become connected with UFO matters in quite a big way in this country, and in one or two other countries too, I have frequently been asked by a person of my background, a former chief of the defense staff, a former chairman of the NATO military committee, why I think there is a cover-up, or what the reasons may be for governments wishing to cover up the facts about UFOs. And a number of explanations have often been put forward, of which the most frequent and perhaps the most plausible is that the governments concerned, which are primarily that of the United States and that of my own country, believe that if they told the truth, which is that there are objects in our atmosphere which are technically miles in advance of anything that we can deploy, that we have no means of stopping them coming here, and that we have no defense against them should they be hostile, that, I believe, is because governments fear that if they did disclose those facts, people would panic. People would rush about, jam the switchboard like they did on that famous day in New York when there was a spoof, Martians have landed. People will go mad and they'll jump up and down. I don't believe that at all. I've said so in print. I've said it in a foreword I wrote to one of Timothy Good's books. I do not believe that people today in the 21st century are going to panic at that sort of information. After all, they have put up with the introduction of nuclear weapons, the destruction of 2 Japanese cities 50 years ago. They put up, not put up with, it's the wrong word, they take as a matter of course that we can land vehicles on Mars. They land to the precise instant forecast years before, vehicles on distant planets. Why should they panic? We are being visited and have been visited for many years by people from outer space, from other civilizations, that it behoves us, in case some of these people in the future or now should turn hostile, to find out who they are, where they come from, and what they want. This should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation and not the subject of rubbishing by tabloid newspapers.
There is abundant evidence that we are being contacted, that civilizations have been visiting us for a very long time, that their appearance is bizarre from any kind of traditional materialistic Western point of view, that these visitors use the technologies of consciousness. They use toroids, they use co-rotating magnetic disks for their propulsion systems. That seems to be a common denominator of the UFO phenomenon, and how they can work, manipulate time and space locally so that they can have their own anti-gravity propulsion and their own field of energy that's isolated, gravitational field, electro-gravitational field that's different. The case of contact, of course, the evidence is overwhelming. There's something happening. Tens of thousands of UFO photographs, very well-grounded researchers researching the abduction phenomenon. And we realize that something is happening, something is unfolding. We can't deny that.
Here with more, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon. Christopher, do you believe the UFOs exist?
We know that UFOs exist. This is not no longer an issue. The Navy itself has publicly acknowledged the fact that they exist, and Navy pilots, active duty pilots, have gone on the record in the New York Times acknowledging the fact that they exist. So the issue now is, why are they here? Where are they coming from? And what is the technology behind these devices that we're observing?
Are there indications that these unidentified flying objects are doing things that this world is not capable of?
There are indications, actually. The Nimitz incident, a famous example of this, which was well documented by multiple radars, multiple pilots in broad daylight. That vehicle demonstrated speeds in excess of 5,000 miles an hour. It was able to hover 50 feet above the ocean after descending from above 80,000 feet. So the pilots who are observing these craft are absolutely mystified, and that comes through clearly in their public statements.
The bottom line, what do you think this was?
I believe, as do the other folks that were on the flight, that when we visually saw it, that it was something not from this world.
It's hard to understand, how do these vehicles maintain lift? How are they propelled? There are no wing surfaces, there's no exhaust. So there's nothing that we're familiar with that we've deployed in the air that has a power source other than chemical energy like fuel. These are so radically different than anything we're familiar with, and their performance is so advanced and so sophisticated. It's frankly just baffling.
So is it fair to boil it down to two possibilities? Either another country has leapfrogged the United States in technology, or extraterrestrial?
Those are the leading hypotheses, yes.
Do you also believe that UFOs have come to Earth?
There has been and is an existing presence, an ET presence. And I spent millions and millions. I probably spent more as an individual than anybody else in the United States has ever spent on this subject.
Is it risky for you to say, in public that you believe in UFOs and aliens?
I don't care.
You don't worry that some people will say, did you hear that guy? He sounds like he's crazy.
I don't care.
Why not?
It's not going to make a difference. It's not going to change reality of what I know.
Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter other forms of intelligent life?
You don't have to go anywhere.
You can find it here.
Yeah.
So let me ask you one last question. Do you believe, based on your decade of serving in the U.S. government on this question, that the U.S. government has in its possession any material from one of these aircrafts?
I do, yes.
You think the U.S. government has debris from a UFO in its possession right now?
Unfortunately, Tucker, I really have to be careful of my NDA. I really can't go into a lot of more detail than that.
Okay.
But simply put, yes.
I would like to submit to our nation my personal testimony of one document related to one of these ongoing topics, which I saw while in office serving on the State Federal Relations and Veterans Affairs Committee. The document I saw was an official brief to President Eisenhower. To the best of my memory, this brief was pervaded with a sense of hope, and it informed President Eisenhower of the continued presence of extraterrestrial beings here in the United States of America. The brief seemed to indicate that a meeting between the President and some of these visitors could be arranged as appropriate if desired. The tone of the brief indicated to me that there was no need for concern, since these visitors were in no way causing any harm or had any intention whatsoever of causing any disruption then or in the future. While I can't verify the times or places or that any meeting or meetings occurred directly between Eisenhower and these visitors, because of his optimism in his farewell address in 1961, I personally believe that Eisenhower did indeed meet with these extraterrestrial off-world astronauts. I hope my personal testimony will aid the nation in its quest for continued enlightenment. I am honored to follow in the footsteps of those who have come forward with their personal testimonies, those who deserve the admiration of the American people for sharing their accounts publicly in an effort to elevate our knowledge to a higher understanding of our existence.